Okay, this is going to be the second part of your Bill of of your First Amendment PowerPoints. The first one talked about the generalities of the First Amendment and then freedom of religion. So let's take a peek at the freedom of speech. Can Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. So here are some of the things a person can do. We may have talked about this in class. One of the things that the Supreme Court has protected the most is political speech. A person can protest, again, without getting out of control. That's a form of freedom of speech, is protesting, whether it be pro-life or pro-choice or any of a number of protests. Texas versus Johnson is a landmark court case because it found a Texas law that banned flag burning as a violation of freedom of expression, which is another form of symbolic speech. It's expression by conduct. In theory, they weren't saying anything, but it is still protected under the freedom of speech. You can say racist and hateful slogans. That is from a Supreme Court case, National Socialist Party of Illinois versus the Village of Skokie. A little background to that. If this happened when I was a kid in the 70s, the National Social Party wanted to have a parade. They were instigators of this, so they asked the Village of Skokie, which has a high population of Jewish people, they asked for a permit, a parade permit, and they kept on being denied. They sued, saying that was a violation of freedom of speech. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said, hey, we might not like what these guys are saying, but they have the right to say it. They also went on and said, you could have a counter parade that has a counter message. And so they encouraged the Village of Skokie to actually have a counter parade that would shout slogans that the National Socialist Party would abhor, freedom of place and just the freedoms that we love. So it was a competition, not a competition, but it was a marketplace of ideas. And then school cannot regulate student expression if it does not disrupt the educational process. Now, the key concept is if it does not disrupt the educational process. That is in the court case Tinker versus Des Moines. Again, this is called symbolic speech. They are not speaking, but just wearing an armband is protected. Again, school cannot regulate student expression if it does not disrupt the educational process. There are limits on freedom of speech. For instance, you can't say, I've got a bomb, I'm going to blow up this plane, or I'm going to kill the president. You can't say we have a bomb at school. That is a violation of your freedom of speech. This goes to the concept of the right of an individual to say things versus the right of society to be potentially harmed by the chaos that speech presents. And that is in the landmark court case, Schenck versus the United States. You can't sexually harass somebody and then claim that is free speech, because it's not. Again, right of society not to have to deal with that type of speech versus the right of the individual to speak that way. And again, it's a balance. The right of society does not have to hear that. You cannot use extremely crude language in public forum. Again, the right of society outweighs the individual's right to use that language. You cannot use disrespectful, vulgar language in schools. I think you've dealt with that with the court case from the free speech in schools. And truly, this is, in essence, so well written. In other words, any restriction this freedom should always be viewed with skepticism. The Supreme Court is not looking to curb your freedom of speech. When they do, it obviously is going to be important. Freedom of the press. You can print any political position you want. You can make fun of people, especially politicians or celebrities. You can expose wrongdoings by the government. Landmark court cases, New York Times versus United States, 1971. That was the Pentagon Papers. But that freedom comes with a price. The press cannot libel, which is intentionally injuring a person's reputation by printing false facts. So the kicker with libel is you have to prove, which is very difficult, you have to prove that the press knowingly printed something false. So that's a high mark for that protects the press here. You cannot disclose defense secrets, and there is no prior restraint. Prior meaning before, and restraint, stopping. There is no stopping prior to a story is run unless there's defense secrets being printed. Freedom of assembly, you can protest. You can have a parade, but remember you need a permit. You can parade chanting hate slogans, which is that Nazi Party versus Skokie. And gang members can congregate in public. Now, I realize that might sound bizarre, but in the end, the city of Chicago passed an ordinance, which is another term for law, because they were so tired in the late 90s of the gang violence that they were looking for a way to arrest gang members, that they passed an ordinance saying 3 or more gang members on a street corner could be arrested. And in the end, the Supreme Court found that was unconstitutional because of freedom of assembly. You cannot protest in a group by throwing rocks and breaking windows. You cannot hang out on private land against the owner's will. That's loitering. And you can't be found at 1 o'clock in the morning with a bunch of teenagers and say it's your freedom of assembly. There's a teen curfew involved. So you cannot break teen curfew and claim it as a freedom of assembly. And again, there's a petition of the government. You want to be able to confront the government if you feel that they have wronged you or someone else. So you may sue the government for wrongs. If you do expose the government for wrongdoings, you cannot be punished. That's a whistleblowing law. And of course, the courts decide those wrongs. Now we leave the First Amendment and its wraps, religion, assembly, press, petition, and speech. And now we move on to the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. Here, there's a big controversy. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed. This is a perfect example of the right of society versus the right of the individual. How can the government keep guns away from criminals and the youth? But yet, in order to keep guns away from criminals, does that limit the right of law-abiding citizens? In other words, we can have as many laws limiting guns, but the criminals aren't going to obey those laws, the only people who obey those laws are the law-abiding gun the citizens that obey those rules. And then finally, the Third Amendment. The government cannot force you to shelter soldiers in your home without your consent in time of war or peace. This comes directly from the Boston Tea Party, when the British brought many British soldiers and had nowhere to house them, so they forced them into colonial homes. And this is from a conservative reporter, blogger, Peggy Noonan. The Third Amendment may be the last in court, or the last in the hearts of its countrymen, but we have no reason to assume that will always be so. So what Peggy is saying is that it might not be really significant, but we still, we don't know what it's going to be like in 100 years. And in other words, to strike it down, we need another amendment to alleviate that. Okay, so that's the chapter 19, 2 PowerPoints. The next PowerPoints are going to go over the rights of the accused. Do me a favor, please look at this information in the First Amendment, 2 PowerPoints. If you have questions, please write them down and pose them to the class, because I'm sure there are other people who can answer them.